The dust swirled around the hooves of the approaching horses as Jeremiah Blackwood rode into the town of Cedar Ridge, his weathered face set in determination. Behind him, his son Thomas followed reluctantly, knowing full well the purpose of this visit to town. The elder Blackwood owned the largest cattle ranch in 3 counties, stretching across thousands of acres of prime Texas grassland, and with it came both respect and responsibility that weighed heavy on his shoulders. For months, Jeremiah had been pressing his 26-year-old son about marriage, insisting that it was time to secure the family legacy with a proper wife from a respectable family. The Blackwood name carried weight in these parts, built on 3 generations of hard work, shrewd business deals, and the kind of reputation that opened doors throughout the territory. Jeremiah had specific ideas about what kind of woman would be suitable for his heir, and those ideas centered on the wealthy families who lived in the grand houses on the hill overlooking Cedar Ridge. Thomas dismounted his horse outside the general store, his boots hitting the wooden boardwalk with a hollow thud. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, earned from years of ranch work, but his eyes held a gentleness that set him apart from his father's harder edges. While Jeremiah saw marriage as a business arrangement, Thomas harbored romantic notions about love and partnership that he kept carefully hidden from his father's pragmatic worldview. The plan was simple, at least in Jeremiah's mind. They would visit the homes of 3 prominent families in town, each with eligible daughters who would bring substantial dowries and social connections to the Blackwood legacy. First was Margaret Caldwell, daughter of the bank president, whose family had arrived from Boston with considerable wealth and Eastern refinement. Second was Victoria Hammond, whose father owned the largest mercantile operation in the county and had political ambitions that stretched all the way to the state capital. Finally, there was Elizabeth Morrison, whose family controlled the railroad depot and had connections that could prove invaluable for shipping cattle to distant markets. As they walked down Main Street toward their first appointment, Thomas's attention was drawn to the sound of children's laughter coming from the one-room schoolhouse at the end of the street. Through the open windows, he could hear a woman's voice, clear and melodious, leading the children in a geography lesson about the eastern states. Something about that voice made him pause, and despite his father's impatient gesturing, Thomas found himself walking toward the schoolhouse. Miss Sarah Chen stood at the front of the classroom, a young woman of mixed Chinese and Irish heritage whose presence in Cedar Ridge had caused quite a stir when she arrived 6 months earlier. She had been hired by the school board primarily because no other qualified teachers had applied for the position, and her credentials from the Teachers College in San Francisco were impeccable. Her black hair was pinned back in a practical bun, and her simple grey dress spoke of modest means. But there was something about her bearing that commanded respect from both her students and the adults in town. Thomas watched through the window as she helped a struggling student with his arithmetic, her patience evident as she worked through the problem step by step. When she looked up and caught sight of him watching, their eyes met for a moment that seemed to stretch longer than it should have. There was intelligence in her gaze, and a quiet strength that Thomas found immediately compelling. Jeremiah's voice cut through the moment like a whip crack. "Thomas, we have appointments to keep. Come along." The older man had noticed his son's distraction and disapproved. Everyone in town knew about the schoolteacher, and while she was respected for her education and dedication to the children, she was hardly the kind of woman Jeremiah envisioned as the future mistress of the Blackwood Ranch. The first visit to the Caldwell mansion proved to be exactly what Thomas had expected. Margaret Caldwell was undoubtedly beautiful, with golden hair arranged in elaborate curls and a dress that probably cost more than most people in Cedar Ridge earned in a year. She spoke eloquently about her finishing school education in Boston and her accomplishments in music and painting. Her father made it clear that a union between their families would be advantageous for both parties, with business opportunities that could expand the Blackwood holdings significantly. Yet as Thomas sat in the ornate parlour, sipping tea from delicate china cups and listening to Margaret play a complicated piece on the piano, his thoughts kept drifting back to the schoolteacher's warm smile and the way she had gently corrected a child's mistake without making him feel foolish. Margaret's conversation centered on society events and fashion trends from back east, topics that felt distant and irrelevant to Thomas's daily life on the ranch. The visit to the Hammond household followed a similar pattern. Victoria Hammond was equally accomplished, with a sharp mind for business that impressed even Jeremiah. She spoke knowledgeably about cattle prices and market trends, demonstrating that she would be a practical partner in managing the family's business interests. Her father hinted at political connections that could benefit the Blackwood name, and Victoria herself expressed interest in expanding into other ventures beyond cattle ranching. Thomas found Victoria more engaging than Margaret, appreciating her business acumen and direct manner of speaking. However, there was a calculating quality to her interest that made him uncomfortable. When she looked at him, he sensed that she was evaluating his worth as a business proposition rather than seeing him as a man. The conversation felt more like a negotiation than a courtship, with terms and conditions being subtly discussed, even as they maintained the pretense of social pleasantries. The final visit to the Morrison residence proved to be the most awkward of all. Elizabeth Morrison was a quiet young woman who seemed overwhelmed by the attention and expectations placed upon her. Her father dominated the conversation, outlining his vision for how a marriage between their families could revolutionize cattle transportation throughout the region. Elizabeth sat silently through most of the discussion, occasionally offering shy smiles but contributing little to the conversation. Thomas found himself feeling sorry for her, recognizing a kindred spirit who was being pushed into an arrangement she didn't seem to want. As they rode home that evening, Jeremiah was clearly pleased with the day's progress. 3 excellent prospects, son. Each one would bring significant advantages to our family. Margaret Caldwell has the social connections we need to expand our influence. Victoria Hammond has the business sense to help us diversify our holdings. And Elizabeth Morrison's family connections to the railroad could revolutionize our shipping capabilities. Thomas listened to his father's analysis while his mind wandered back to that brief moment of connection with the schoolteacher. There had been something in her eyes that spoke to him on a level deeper than business advantages or social connections. He found himself wondering about her story, how she had ended up in Cedar Ridge, and what dreams she harbored for her future. Over the following weeks, Jeremiah arranged several more meetings with each of the 3 families, pushing Thomas to make a decision. The pressure was constant and increasingly uncomfortable. Margaret Caldwell began dropping hints about wedding plans and honeymoon destinations in Europe. Victoria Hammond presented detailed business proposals for ventures they could undertake together. Elizabeth Morrison's father grew more insistent about finalizing an arrangement, concerned that other suitors might emerge. During this time, Thomas found himself making frequent trips to town, ostensibly to handle ranch business, but actually hoping to catch glimpses of the schoolteacher. He would time his visits to coincide with the end of the school day, watching as Sarah Chen walked her students to the edge of town, ensuring each child made it safely to their home. Her dedication to her pupils was evident in every interaction, and Thomas admired the way she commanded respect through kindness rather than authority. One afternoon, when a sudden spring thunderstorm caught him in town, Thomas found himself taking shelter under the schoolhouse eaves. Sarah was inside, grading papers by lamplight as rain drummed against the windows. When she noticed him standing outside, she invited him in to wait out the storm. This was the first time they had spoken beyond polite greetings, and Thomas discovered that her voice was even more pleasant in conversation than he had imagined. Sarah told him about her journey from San Francisco, how she had wanted to make a difference in the lives of children in frontier communities. She spoke passionately about education and the importance of providing opportunities for all children, regardless of their family's social standing or economic circumstances. Her dedication to her students was inspiring, and Thomas found himself sharing his own thoughts about the responsibility that came with privilege and the importance of using one's advantages to help others. As the storm passed and the afternoon light returned, Thomas realized that he had been talking with Sarah for over an hour. The conversation had flowed naturally, covering topics from literature to philosophy to their shared love of the vast Texas landscape. For the first time in months, he felt truly understood and appreciated for who he was, rather than what he represented. When Thomas returned home that evening, Jeremiah immediately sensed that something had changed. His son seemed distracted and less interested in discussing the merits of his 3 potential brides. When pressed, Thomas admitted that he had been having second thoughts about the entire arrangement. This confession led to the first serious argument between father and son in years. Jeremiah was incredulous that Thomas would even consider rejecting such advantageous matches. He reminded his son of the sacrifices made by previous generations to build their legacy and the responsibility they had to future generations of Blackwoods. The conversation grew heated as Thomas tried to explain his desire for a marriage based on mutual affection and shared values rather than business considerations. The argument reached a climax when Jeremiah discovered that Thomas had been spending time with the schoolteacher. His reaction was explosive, with accusations about Thomas throwing away his future for a woman with no family connections, no dowry, and questionable social standing due to her mixed heritage. The words were harsh and revealed prejudices that Thomas had never fully recognized in his father before. Thomas left the house that night feeling more conflicted than ever. He understood his father's concerns about maintaining the family's status and ensuring the ranch's continued prosperity. The Blackwood name had been built on careful alliances and strategic partnerships, and his marriage would indeed have implications beyond his personal happiness. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that choosing a bride based solely on practical considerations would lead to a lifetime of regret. The next few days passed in tense silence between father and son. Thomas went about his ranch duties mechanically, his mind constantly replaying conversations with both his father and Sarah. He found himself weighing his obligations to his family legacy against his desire for personal fulfillment. The pressure to make a decision grew more intense as all 3 families began making increasingly direct inquiries about his intentions. Finally, Thomas made a decision that would change the course of his life. Instead of choosing one of the 3 approved candidates, he rode into town with a different purpose entirely. He found Sarah Chen in her classroom after school hours, preparing lessons for the next day. When he asked if he could speak with her privately, she sensed the serious nature of his visit and invited him to sit down. Thomas began by explaining his situation honestly. He told Sarah about his father's expectations and the pressure to choose a bride from among the wealthy families in town. He described the advantages that each potential match would bring to the Blackwood legacy and acknowledged the practical wisdom of his father's approach. Then he shared his own feelings about marriage and partnership, expressing his belief that true compatibility and mutual respect were more important than social position or financial gain. Sarah listened carefully to Thomas's explanation, her expression thoughtful and understanding. When he finished speaking, she shared her own perspective on the situation. She acknowledged the challenges they would face if they pursued a relationship, including the disapproval of his father and the gossip that would inevitably follow. Her position as a schoolteacher was precarious enough without the added complication of romantic involvement with the town's most eligible bachelor. Despite these obstacles, Sarah admitted that she had also felt a connection during their previous conversations. She respected Thomas's dedication to his family and his genuine concern for the welfare of his ranch hands and their families. Unlike the other wealthy men she had encountered, Thomas seemed to understand that privilege came with responsibility to help others, rather than simply to accumulate more wealth and power. Thomas asked Sarah if she would consider allowing him to court her properly, despite the challenges they would face. He promised to be patient and to work toward gaining acceptance from both his family and the community. Sarah agreed, but insisted that they proceed slowly and carefully, mindful of the potential consequences for both of their futures. When Thomas returned home and announced his decision to his father, Jeremiah's reaction was even more explosive than expected. The older man accused his son of destroying everything their family had worked to build and threatened to disinherit him if he proceeded with such a foolish course of action. The argument that followed was bitter and painful, with both men saying things they would later regret. Thomas stood firm in his decision, explaining that he had found a woman who shared his values and would be a true partner in both personal and professional endeavors. He pointed out that Sarah's education and intelligence would be assets to the ranch, and that her dedication to helping others aligned with his own vision for using their wealth responsibly. However, Jeremiah was unmoved by these arguments, seeing only the loss of advantageous business connections and social standing. The news of Thomas's choice spread quickly through Cedar Ridge, creating exactly the kind of scandal that both he and Sarah had anticipated. The three rejected families were insulted and angry, with Mr. Caldwell withdrawing his business from Blackwood Enterprises and Mr. Hammond threatening legal action over what he considered a breach of implicit agreement. The social elite of the town closed ranks against what they saw as an inappropriate match that threatened their established order. However, Thomas also discovered unexpected support from quarters he hadn't anticipated. Many of the ranch hands and their families admired Sarah's dedication to their children's education and were pleased to see their employer's son choose based on character rather than social position. Several business owners in town, who had been excluded from the inner circle of wealthy families, quietly expressed approval of Thomas's decision to choose merit over privilege. Sarah faced her own challenges as the relationship became public knowledge. Some parents questioned whether she should continue as the town's teacher, arguing that her romantic involvement with Thomas Blackwood compromised her professional position. The school board called a special meeting to discuss her future employment, with heated debates about propriety and moral standards. Despite the opposition they faced, Thomas and Sarah continued their courtship with dignity and determination. Thomas made a point of accompanying Sarah to church services and community events, demonstrating his serious intentions and refusing to hide their relationship. Sarah maintained her professional standards as a teacher, while graciously accepting the social criticism that came with her choice. Gradually, as people in Cedar Ridge observed the couple's behavior and commitment to each other, attitudes began to shift. Sarah's continued excellence as a teacher and her positive influence on the community's children made it difficult for even her critics to argue for her dismissal. Thomas's respectful treatment of Sarah and his continued dedication to his ranch responsibilities demonstrated that his choice was based on genuine affection rather than mere rebellion against his father. The turning point came when a late spring flood threatened several homesteads downstream from the Blackwood Ranch. Thomas organized a massive rescue and relief effort, with Sarah working alongside him to coordinate supplies and medical care for the displaced families. Their partnership during this crisis showed the community how well they worked together and how their different skills complemented each other. Even Jeremiah was forced to acknowledge the positive aspects of Sarah's character as he watched her tireless efforts to help the flood victims. While he remained disappointed in his son's choice, he began to see that Sarah possessed qualities of compassion and competence that might indeed make her a valuable addition to the family. The gradual thawing of his opposition gave Thomas hope that complete reconciliation might eventually be possible. 6 months after their first conversation in the schoolhouse, Thomas proposed to Sarah in the same location where they had sheltered from the storm. He offered her a simple ring that had belonged to his grandmother, explaining that it represented the enduring values of love and commitment that he hoped would characterize their marriage. Sarah accepted, and they began planning a wedding that would unite two very different worlds. The wedding itself became a symbol of the changes taking place in Cedar Ridge. While some members of the social elite stayed away in protest, the church was filled with ranch hands, townspeople, and children from Sarah's classes who had come to celebrate their teacher's happiness. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with vows that emphasize partnership and mutual support rather than traditional promises of obedience. As Thomas and Sarah began their married life together, they worked to bridge the gap between the ranch's traditional operations and Sarah's more progressive ideas about education and community development. Sarah established a lending library for the ranch hands and their families, organized literacy classes for adults who had never learned to read, and started a small school for the children of ranch workers who lived too far from town to attend regular classes. Thomas found that his wife's perspectives helped him see the ranch operations from new angles. Her suggestions for improving working conditions and providing better housing for the ranch hands initially met with resistance from Jeremiah, but the increased loyalty and productivity of the workers eventually proved the wisdom of her approach. Sarah's influence helped transform the Blackwood Ranch from a traditional hierarchical operation into a more collaborative community. The success of their partnership gradually won over even the most stubborn critics in Cedar Ridge. Sarah's continued excellence as a teacher and her positive influence on the ranch community demonstrated that Thomas had made a wise choice based on character and capability rather than social position. Even the three families who had initially been insulted by Thomas's rejection began to acknowledge that he and Sarah seemed genuinely happy together. Jeremiah's relationship with his daughter-in-law remained complicated but gradually improved over time. He came to respect Sarah's intelligence and dedication, even if he never fully understood his son's decision to prioritize love over business advantage. When Sarah gave birth to the first of their children, Jeremiah found himself genuinely fond of the woman who had given him a grandchild and helped secure the family's future in ways he had never anticipated. Years later, as Thomas and Sarah raised their children and continued to develop both the ranch and the community around it, their marriage became a model for others who believed that true partnership was more valuable than social convenience. Their story was told and retold in Cedar Ridge, becoming part of the local folklore about the importance of choosing with the heart as well as the head. The Blackwood legacy continued, but it was transformed by Sarah's influence into something richer and more meaningful than mere wealth and social position. Their children grew up understanding that privilege came with responsibility, and that true success was measured not just in dollars and acres, but in the positive impact one could have on the lives of others. Thomas never regretted his decision to choose love over social advantage. In Sarah, he had found not just a wife, but a true partner who shared his values and enhanced his ability to make a positive difference in the world. Their marriage proved that the best foundations for a lasting relationship were mutual respect, shared goals, and genuine affection rather than business considerations or social expectations. The story of Thomas Blackwood and Sarah Chen became a testament to the power of following one's heart while remaining true to one's principles. In a time and place where marriages were often arranged for practical reasons, their union demonstrated that love and compatibility could indeed create stronger foundations for both personal happiness and family success than any amount of social positioning or financial advantage. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, love, and adventure from America's frontier days. In the comments below, Tell us about a time when you had to choose between following your heart and meeting others' expectations. What would you have done in Thomas's situation, and do you think he made the right choice? Your thoughts and stories help make our community stronger, so please share your perspectives with us.